Okay, good morning. Hi. As Gary said, I'm David Morgan, lead designer at TomTom Sports Division, working on our wearables. And this year, we came out with a new iteration on our sports watch, which is called TomTom Spark. We just announced it a few months ago. And really, Spark's our first product that tries to go from a performance sports, runner, training, performance, elite athlete proposition and take it more to the fitness proposition. So exercise, trying to listen to our users who tell us things like, we really want to run with music, but running with a phone is bullocks. So the big highlight is that we're trying to solve the problem with Spark and give people a way to wirelessly stream music from their watch while also getting their heart rate data right on the watch, no peripheral. So that's the big promise. And really what I want to do today is talk a little bit about the design process on how we got there. Specifically, the first thing we do is in design, these are attractive marketing people, fitness athletes. We try to talk about real people, and we try to eat our own dog food, so I'm one of the real people who's out testing our products every day. This is me in the Copenhagen Marathon last May, and as you can see, towards the end of the race, I'm just general crisis all over. Nothing's making sense. I've just let the pace setters pass me, the 3:30 pace setters, which with them slips away my achievement goal of doing my first sub 3:30 marathon. And it's funny, in Danish, the pace setters, I believe, are called fart holders. The word in Danish, is anyone Danish here? They're called fart holders, yeah. And the smells at the end of a marathon, no one talks about them, but it's like, it's part of the experience that you're not allowed to report on, is this terrible, terrible smell. Anyways, the point is I don't hate running, I just hated that race. And really, when I think more about my experience of running, this is one of my favorite runs. I'm out recording with one of our other gizmos, which is the TomTom Bandit. It's a little action camera. I'm recording from my arm, the perspective of our watch, running along the coastal path in South Cornwall, around Land's End, St. Just. I met with my fiance, and this was a glorious run. But really, this is the perspective of the technology, where we're thinking about taking GPS data, heart rate data, putting that into a compelling story, and too often in our business, we get fixated in on this story of what's the watch doing. So really in design, part of my role is really broadening the conversation to be more about what's the human experience, what's the human perspective on that split-second glance when I look at the watch and I need it to perform and tell me exactly what I'm looking for. So this is really the challenge of wearables, I guess, that's a bit different from mobile experiences, is that they need to work reliably all the time, but really only for that split moment. So we're really interested in what's that split second, what do people care about? And yeah, I guess this proposition of Spark from the early stage was let's create something more towards the fitness market, and so people more focused on exercise. And I realized, I don't exercise, I train, I run, I work out. All these things are a means to accomplishing a goal, an achievement, something I'm really fixated on and can work towards. And so here the shift in thinking is maybe we have to start considering exercise as an end in itself rather than just as means to an end. And really if we start looking back at where we inherit this idea in our culture of achievement-based sports shifting down to more of a everyday exercise kind of attitude. I'd assumed this is something that's been around, from antiquity. We have Greco-Roman wrestling and sport and the Olympiads. But actually, the idea of exercise and sort of the everyman's access to exercise is quite a contemporary one. Some of you will know this man, Bill Bowerman, who we have to thank, I'll argue, we have to thank for it. Bill Bowerman's a really great coach. In his 25-year career as the coach of the University of Oregon's track team, he gets something like 25 athletes to the Olympics. He's got like 33 NCAA champions coming out of his course. But the thing you already know about Bill Bowerman is that he introduces the idea of jogging to the world. And it kicks off in 1962 when he goes to visit a colleague in New Zealand who's also a professional track coach, training elite athletes to perform at a world-class level. And he learns from this guy in New Zealand whose name is escaping me. We can look at it later. He learns that he's introduced a new form of training for these athletes, which is like off-track jogging, they call it. And so the athletes leave the track and they go up and down the road. They call it road work. And Bowerman comes back to America with this new training. He brings it in for his athletes. But then he also realizes the real virtue of it is that we can get outside of just elite athletes and people training to be professionals. We can introduce this practice of jogging at a more populous level. We can increase the fitness throughout our society. People who get too old for Olympics or indeed too young all can access this new idea. But he has a problem, Bill Bowerman. He has a design problem that he needs to solve. And that's that there are no shoes for running on the road. Everyone's performance shoes are really about track running. They're very light, chiseled down, no soles. So Bill Bowerman sets up in his basement, and it's poorly ventilated, and he starts mixing chemicals on his wife's waffle iron to create the famous waffle sole that was Nike's first product. And so, if you hadn't guessed, Bill Bowerman's one of the co-founders of Nike. Anyway, I think Nike's a really good story to start thinking about, this mid-20th century story, because they're like the paradigm of a successful sports brand. The ethos of design seems to permeate all their marketing and all their products. And this idea that's, I think, core to that ethos of no finish line, that the Nike consumer is always looking past just an achievement of a finish line, but always just about improvement, what's beyond the finish line, or maybe there never was one. So it's worth mentioning that, yeah, TomTom Sport's first product was actually the Nike GPS sports watch, so I guess the Nike story seems to dovetail nicely with ours. But it's a few years later where Carl J. Kasperson writes this paper on exercise. It's really the first piece of academic literature where anyone's trying to consider what is exercise, what does it mean, and the highlight is that it's a targeted activity toward improvement rather than achieving anything in particular. So at TomTom Design, we really started thinking, okay, what about if we take our performance products that are all focused on achievement and we start trying to reposition them around improvement, things being an end in themselves rather than goal-driven means to an end. We started recognizing that's a lot like how we do design, actually. Design is a process. It's an iterative one that through sprint after sprint of software and hardware development can actually start feeling like an endurance exercise. And so we can come up with these principles that help us articulate that to other people and talk about how our iterative design process can actually inform our products better. For anyone who doesn't really know about process of software design, I'll just quickly talk about what does it mean to be a minimum viable product. And this illustration really simplifies, but might be a useful linchpin. We really start with a prototype. So we make something as quickly as possible. In this case, it's a wireframe of a mobile app that you might be able to click around with and demonstrate an idea to someone else and talk about what a user might be able to get out of it. We then fill that prototype up with real content, and at some point we call it an MVP. And unfortunately here this is like a software management's perspective of what design is, because we're just coloring in the pixels in the final stages. But I actually like this model better for talking about minimum viable product development, where we can say, you can't build a car by first, well, you can build a car by first creating a wheel and putting that wheel onto a chassis, putting in an engine and then a body around the car. But if you want to go to market at every step and test how your product's being received, what's important is taking your idea down to the most minimum simple form of it. In this case, it's an assumption that people want to get places faster. And we can introduce a bit of technology that helps them do that, like a skateboard or a scooter. We can then build on that skateboard scooter to be something a little bit more sophisticated. Maybe it's got pedals. Maybe it's got an engine at some point, but we're not going to start by designing an engine. We're going to start by testing the hypothesis about what the human need at the core of that's really about. So it's that process that I want to now just focus on as a few examples that we stumbled into through the design process of trying to come up with Spark. And it starts, one puzzle is sleep tracking. So I think Marco did a good job of talking about the history of activity tracking spreading into the mass consumer space and people starting to talk about and be interested in these sort of lifestyle analytics, feedback data about my day-to-day activities, steps I've taken, my resting heart rate. But sleep tracking is a real puzzle. Like, who wants to wear a device to bed every night in order to have a pretty graph is something, frankly, we're still struggling to understand. But it seems to be true that if you just look at what's selling in the market, you really have to have sleep tracking in your product to be competitive. So we knew it was important to do sleep tracking. And we had to sort of reverse engineer that demand into a real human proposition. And so we start by looking at graphs, really technical graphs about all the rich data we can collect about sleep phases and accelerometer and heart rate data through sleep that can help tell the picture of the quality, duration, and trying to find something meaningful about this sleep metric. So this is like our first iteration. It is very technical. It's all these graphs collapsed into one thing. We then think, oh, maybe we should pull them out. Maybe we'll be able to better draw people's attention into the time you spent in a light phase or a heavy phase. That's really your feeling of restfulness comes from that deep sleep. So trying to focus people on, are you achieving enough deep sleep seemed to be a good problem. Yeah, indeed, it just gets really abstract and technical, and we say, like, let's get it really simple. Maybe it's just a matter of how, it's just a simple bar graph. How much sleep did I get? Are there periods of interruption? What can I do differently in my life to avoid those in the future? Then turning that graph, again, in all these stages, we're testing with real users, we're going and we're looking at all different phone resolutions, obviously, into all different global markets, and trying to make sure we have a proposition that resonates there. And so here, really what we're testing is this idea of flipping through one day to the next, actually looking at just a discrete period of time and trying to make that make sense when I think back on my life or yesterday's activity is like an enormous challenge for a consumer. It takes a technologist. So in this iteration, what we're really trying to do is say, well, what if the key story is about seeing how last night's sleep related to the night before, and the night before that, and maybe we give people this really simple flick mechanism to go through those days. But ultimately, we land on something that looks like this. This is where we are at MVP, our our first consumer shipment, and our sleep graphs look like this. It's a bit light on the screen, but what we're seeing is a stacked week and a sleep pattern through that week. So I can see variation of time to bed. I can quickly compare trends day over day, and then week over week by going to the monthly views. And yeah, this design solution or proposal is as a minimum anyways. You can see that we got rid of a few of things we thought would be really important to users around sleep quality and the depth of sleep in order to focus on that key story we want people to take away, which is how's my sleeping changed or how's my feeling changed as a metric of how much sleep I'm getting. And so to relate it back to this idea of improvement and endurance rather than just achievement, we remember as one of our principles this line from Christopher McDougall's famous Born to Run, which is really a book all marathoners read. And Cabolo Blanco's this great long-distance runner who's talking about this seamless flow that really works for getting into this endurance mind state. He says, think fast, light, easy, smooth. So we try to adopt that in our testing our UX assumptions and come up with a product that feels light, smooth, and fast. Another example is around achievement of step tracking, step counting. So we had this belief that our customer is really motivated by wanting to achieve a daily step counting goal. I think we also adopt the 10,000 step mark that seems to be canonical that Marco mentioned. And our initial UI for that is just a ring that fills up, and when it fills up, that feels great. I've achieved my goal. I can move on to thinking about tomorrow. I want to achieve that goal. But actually what we see from as that's taken into use and as we test that hypothesis with our users is that the mere achievement of a full ring isn't enough to like motivate a change in behavior or indeed make enough of a comparison on how many steps I take today versus yesterday. What we started thinking about was everything we're leaving out in this oversimplification, and we're missing this sense of a story about what happens when I go on and I achieve more. Comparing an improvement day over day rather than just the raw achievement of a goal. So really what I'm talking about is this is the first iteration where we've got something that after I achieve my goal, I can continue to see my steps going up, but the ring doesn't change. It just stays static. I've achieved the goal, so that should be fine. But actually we miss out on this picture of like, why would I continue to make decisions like taking the stairs versus an escalator if I feel like I've already satisfied my limit? How can we drive users to improve rather than just achieve? And so we start looking at this UI where it's, I think, easier to compare and to articulate when I go beyond that 2,048 step goal or whatever this user happens to have it set to see that final achievement on the ring and where they are today. So all this boils down to one of our core principles, which is around putting our products into their dominant context of use. So when we're testing our hypothesis, we need to go out to the street, we need to go on runs, we need to see how we're actually used and to recognize that actually people are preoccupied. They're not interested in focusing on our interfaces. Really, we work best as a product when we humbly ask to be paid no mind at all. People can take notice of things like the date in this example without really ever having to come out of their environment to focus on it. We're really fixated on this idea from users about being better, not necessarily best. And again, this is a design principle we hear from Johnny Ive, who noticed this. I actually got this through Kanye West, who was talking to Johnny Ive, who's a product designer, and he says that he tells Kanye West, people are so preoccupied with being the best. What we really need to do is tell them to be better and just focus on being better. So really our designs should adopt this idea, and our products, in that we think our fitness goals have the same attitude. This idea of endurance as a shared value and an end in itself becomes a dominant idea. I guess the key takeaway or learning from us was that endurance actually sounds like a negative thing to people who don't already believe in it. You endure torture, you endure a really long meeting or this fourth presentation of a conference, and indeed for the rest of the day. Endurance is this endless cycle and test. But endurance athletes teach us that actually that same process that involves a little bit of pain is something that's an end in itself and a positive and a virtue. And I wholly believe, Patty when he tells us that you can't try to convince an elite athlete that they shouldn't keep going. They really want to keep pushing. They're the endurance, epitome of this endurance virtue. But I would also argue that that same idea trickles down to the everyday fitness enthusiast who can learn that just by being a bit better, enduring a little bit more, they'll see some improvement over where they were yesterday. So yeah, we recognize that our products are always secondary. We never try to be the dominant focus or lens. We put our things into the context of use. In this case, of our swimming products, recognizing that actually we may be looked at once or twice over the course of a 30-minute training session. But never expecting more, and we never want to get in the way or distract people from their core enterprise. And then finally, this kind of reflection on our design process and how we should approach the next iteration in the cycle. That sometimes excellence and perfection and building the Rolls Royce feel like an untouchable dream. It feels like, based on the constraints of resource and typical hardware, software unknowns, we're always really struggling to just inch forward. But by embracing this virtue of improvement over achievement, we recognize that actually we're doing great things in each sprint. And we treat each sprint like a marathon, as an end in itself. And we celebrate them. And it makes us more equipped to advance the conversation in the next one. So, yeah, why endurance? Because really we want to make products that hold this virtue at the center and show that quality endures. We want to remember this fleeting glance through my training and how little you can actually get into the screen and how little actually makes sense in these challenging contexts of use. But we also want to think about all these runners at the end of their marathons, and we want to acknowledge their achievement as being great in and of itself. Really, you can see the elation on their faces. But really, we want to push a little beyond thinking just about marathon as the 26.2 miles that you run on the day in whatever time, 3 hours and 39 minutes and 58 seconds, to focusing on the achievement of the whole exercise, which is the 600 miles you're laying down in training. So we got Spark out, and now really we want to take these design principles and apply them to some of our other product categories. So we're working on golf. I'm trying to up my golf game. Here training with the pro at Terrell's Woods. Down south, you can see his relaxed stroke. I'll save you from seeing my actual shot, but basically I've got a lot to improve. And yeah, let's leave it there and invite questions or discussion on Twitter or now if you like, Gary.
Thank you, David. Any questions for David? There is one. I've got to get my step count up now.
That's it.
Here.
Thank you very much, David. Some of the new technologies and the sort of company philosophy look very impressive and very slick. How are TomTom tackling this issue of perhaps consumers investing in the tech, using the devices, using the apps, etc., getting to a point where they feel, okay, I've measured my sleep, I've measured my diet, I've measured my physical activity. It's now not telling me anything new. And then, of course, we've got the discharge, the rejection, the disuse of the device and the technology. What's TomTom's approach to that?
Yeah, exactly. So it's the known issue, really. It's because we're following some titans to the story about fitness tracking, like Fitbit and Jawbone, that we're able to see the trajectory of these products, which is that people use them with great excitement for the first week or month while they understand their daily routine in a whole new way. They give it some metric that they can now compare it to. But as you say, the story doesn't change. The product gets very stale. And the hardware ends up in a stock drawer rather than on your wrist persistently. And so we've got a few strategies. One way that we're trying to deal with this is we're talking a lot about levels of engagement. And it's actually a mechanic that we borrow from game designers. So game mechanics of like RPGs or highly addictive mobile games actually are writing theory about leveling up through, for instance, a level 1 type experience might be very simple and rewarding really quickly. And then a user gets bored and we want to reward them and send them off to level 2 where the complexity increases. And by level 4, they're doing things they could have never imagined possible at level 1. So we need to be careful to not overwhelm them with too many level 4 type complexity features in those early days. But frankly, we're lucky at TomTom because we started closer to that performance sports cycle where we have all these advanced training features already baked into our products. And so by introducing more level 1 simplicity, we've actually already got the experiences there to like ramp up for users. We just need to introduce them. We just need to show how to unlock these features. So for instance, teaching our users about training with heart rate, if that's something they've not yet done, or zone training, pacing, what resting heart rate changes mean over time. So because there's already a wealth of sophisticated insights there for the performance athletes, really we feel like we have a nice trajectory to start bringing our couch to 5Kers on as they get more complex.
Sorry, I have one more question for you, David.
Hi, David. Great talk, and it's great to see that the connection with Nike is still there, because I know that's been a couple of years advanced. In terms of TomTom's future, what's more important? Is it the design of an or the function? What's more important to TomTom?
By function, you mean technology absent design or something?
Yeah.
So obviously, I'm as designer going to say we're the most important. But actually, what I'd love to do is just throw away the question by saying there's not such a big divide between function and design. Hardware design, if we want to talk about the industrial look and feel of a product and how they cram all of those advanced sensor data into a tiny little package, I think that's an area that we're always striving to grow. In terms of the user experience design and some of the stories we've been talking about today, I think those will continue to be a backbone our product proposition that really we inherit from TomTom's legacy of satellite navigation in cars that people keep using because they find them easy to use. And yeah, trying to differentiate by always on that user experience by offering a solution to a problem that people are having elsewhere.
David, thank you very much.
Thanks.